To finish? Great, thanks. Hi, everyone. So this panel is basically an open session about the mobile web, HTML5, where we came from, where we are, and where we're going. And we have some of the superheroes of HTML5 and the mobile web here in the panel. So I'll do a quick introduction, and from there, I'll let everybody else introduce themselves. We'd like this to be an active panel with participation from the audience, so if you have any questions, please raise your hand and you can quiz the gurus here. Other than that, we've got a variety of topics that we have very strong opinions about, and we'll let everybody go from there. So to start, I'm George Staikos. I run the Web Technologies group at RIM. We produce the web browser. We do the WebKit engine, the port for the WebKit engine, and contribute to WebKit as an open source project. We also produce the WebWorks tools and the WebWorks platform, and basically everything web at RIM except for the website. Lately, I don't think anybody complains to us about the website, but we used to get that as well. So from there, I'll pass on to Eli to do an introduction.
My name is Eli Fidler. I'm the architect of the Web Technologies group at BlackBerry, and so I'm responsible for the technical side of all the stuff that George just talked about.
Okay, that's all? Okay, so hello, good afternoon. My name is Maximiliano, right? You can try to spell my name the whole afternoon, or you can call me Max, that's fine. So I'm a mobile web developer. I have written the program in the mobile web. That's an O'Reilly book. And I manage mobile HTML5.org. That's a website about compatibility on APIs.
And I'm Peter-Paul Koch. I live here in Amsterdam. I run a site called quirksmode.org about browser differences, first on the desktop, now also on the mobile web. And I talk a lot to a lot of browser vendors, including some browser vendors you've never even heard of.
And he's a local, so I have traveled from Argentina.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, we have a very international panel here as well. So the experience of browsing the web has really come a long way on mobile. When we started, when we had the first browsers available on mobile phones, they were actually WAP browsers to start. So we didn't even surf the web, really. It just kind of looked like you were surfing the web. We went on from there to produce browsers that were basically trying to water down the web to make it acceptable to mobile devices, which were small, low-res screens, slow connections, slow processors, not much RAM, and things sort of evolved from there. And then with the current generation of smartphones, especially large screen, touch screen devices, we now have sort of the opposite, where we're trying to replicate what the designers really intended on a touch interface. And these designers have been designing primarily for large screen PCs with a mouse and a keyboard. So the challenges have changed. The performance of devices has gone up. And now we have focus on really a different experience. So some of the challenges that we faced with BlackBerry 10 and what we did in a transition from BlackBerry 7 was reworking the way that we think about interaction on mobile and producing an experience that is much more forward-thinking and modern, allowing you to interact with all of the desktop content, making it fast and fluid and a pleasant user experience. It's no longer just about rendering news sites and information content, lots of text. These things are not even all that central anymore. Now it's about web applications as well. And I would say we went really deep with web applications on BlackBerry 10 in the sense that we actually wrote the web browser as a web application. So on here today, it looks much like a Cascades application, but in fact the web browser is written in HTML5 and JavaScript. That's it. There's no native no native code. The application, Eli can keep me honest, but it's effectively one large JavaScript file with a couple other features in separate JavaScript files, and a stub HTML file and a few CSS files. That's it.
Can we right-click and see the source code?
Yeah. On our production devices, you definitely cannot do that yet, but it's something we're thinking about doing. In fact, Eli can probably talk a little bit more about the development experience for BB10 and how we used all the standard tools like Web Inspector in our development process.
We know that fundamentally web developers have been very successful by view source and copying stuff, and the vast majority of web development out there is done by people who are not expert programmers who spend all of their time writing JavaScript. There's a lot of frameworks out there that abstract away some of the difficult things for you, and that is that's the state of the web today. And that is to some extent good, because it means that it's very easy. The bar is low to build something, but as I'm sure both of these guys can tell you, the bar to build something good is still very high, and there's still a lot of difficult pieces to work around on different platforms. And we try as much as possible to do standard things, but there are always the last 10% where standards don't quite cover the things that you need to do.
And besides, it's what people tend to think of, especially in the early days of mobile web development, say 2 or 3 years ago, was, oh, I have to make a website or a web app. Let's make sure it looks like a native iPhone app. Not a native app, but a native iPhone app. And that's a big problem. It's become a big problem, which basically we still have to solve. I mean, ideally, a true web app, so an installed application written in web standards, should resemble the platform it runs on, but in practice, well, you can do that, but in practice you have to think about it and you have to make sure that it actually works. And that, I think, going forward is one of the challenges we're going to have, to either define a way of true web applications that don't resemble any platform. I'm not sure if we want to go there, but it's one of the questions we have to ask ourselves. Is that a good idea? And on the other hand, making it simpler to create web experiences that resemble the platform they run on.
Maybe we can think about some big companies like, let's say, Facebook. So is Facebook using a native UI on every platform, or is Facebook just Facebook? And maybe they are just adding some stuff that works only on a few platforms, like back buttons and on gesture or something like that.
So I can actually, presuming that the HDMI comes up here.
Yep.
There we go. Perfect. I can actually show you very quickly what we've been talking about here. This is the browser on BlackBerry 10. The user interface we actually moved to the bottom because it's closer to your thumbs, so it avoids too much stretching. But you can see the user interface is very much like the Cascades definition of the user interface on BlackBerry 10. This is all written in HTML5, all of the interaction and everything. Here's our overflow menu, the settings, all of this is HTML5. And talking about content, I have an example here. This is a nice little demo that I've seen. This is all HTML5 as well. Very fast and fluid. We can load up one of the demos here. I have never tried it in landscape, so let's see if it works. There we go. It's pretty beautiful. I today was speaking to somebody who said, was telling me how appreciative she was that they had rewritten their application as a native Cascades application after they had started as a web application. And I immediately said, I don't think there's any foundation to that statement, in the sense that you can write really powerful native feeling applications with HTML5 if you take the right approach. And clearly this demonstrates it. Both the application and the content running inside it are high speed, performant, they look beautiful. So we're in an era now where HTML5 is fully acceptable for writing applications for a demanding consumer product. Here's an example. I believe this one's using WebGL. And you can just push the soup can around and look at it from all the different angles.
I partly disagree with one thing you said. I mean, what we're trying to do in the browser, what the browser vendors are trying to do, is to make sure that web applications look as nicely as native applications do. And that's a good thing to do, but what you should remember is that the browser is always a little behind native. And that's pretty much inevitable, because if you want to make optimal use of system features, then the best thing you can do is create a native app. And the point is that everybody thinks they need optimum access to native features, but they actually don't. Still, what you will see is, because the browser has to basically encompass all the things that you could want to do in a web app, that it's always slightly lagging behind native. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a feature and not a bug, because it's the job of the browser to make sure that content you create can be viewed everywhere, on every platform, even on really low-spec platforms like feature phones. So browsers are trying to catch up with native, which is good, but they won't actually catch up perfectly. And I think that's also a good feature. I'm not sure if you agree with me, but it's...
Oh yeah, I think that one of the common complaints about people about applications that people have tried to build using web technologies in the past has been that you couldn't get native performance. That's really what they meant when they said that you have to go native, is that they tried building stuff using HTML and CSS and JavaScript, and it wasn't fast enough, or it wasn't smooth enough. And I really think that at this point, at least on the top tier smartphones, is a non-starter. It is clearly possible to build something that will render as fast as the device can render using web technologies. That isn't even that difficult anymore. There's enough code samples and frameworks out there that will handle these kind of things for you. So when you say you need to go native for things that have very low level access to the device, sometimes it's about APIs that are not exposed to the web, and there are lots of reasons why APIs don't get exposed to content running in the browser from untrusted sources, security reasons and standardization reasons. But I agree that there will always, APIs will be built on native first, and that is fundamental to every platform. But performance is no longer a reason why you can't build in web. Absolutely, yeah. So the question was, is that proved in numbers? And we definitely see applications in our store, or what some people would call web applications, is websites that are built as a single page and provide an app-like experience in the browser that have great performance. And it's teams that have spent some time building their web applications well. And there are certainly lots of those out there, even lots of ones you wouldn't expect, and there are lots more coming in every day. So I think that developers who are at the leading edge of mobile application development are certainly using web technologies widely. And I'm assuming probably part of the reason you're asking the question is because Mark Zuckerberg went on stage and said HTML5 is not fast enough for Facebook. And to some extent, he had a valid point that they had tried to build their application using HTML technologies on Android, and they had problems. And we know that there are lots of performance problems on the previous generation of browsers, especially on Android. And they worked around that by going native. But I wouldn't say that the only approach they could have taken was to build in Java, or to build in Objective-C, or to build in C++.
Talking about simple commands, if you compare the time to execute X command in a browser or in native, it did the same milliseconds.
But are we comparing 5 milliseconds versus 7, or are we comparing 1 second, just 2 seconds? The thing is,
5 milliseconds.
what's the difference, a second or 10 milliseconds?
Sometimes a second is what you need in order for me to ditch the application.
I agree, right. A second maybe is too much. But sometimes it's about 10 versus 17 milliseconds.
Yeah, so what we've been doing, I think, as a web engine community on the whole, is trying to identify some of these common use cases and create APIs that go directly to native. What you saw up here were demos of primarily direct native calls that were executing GPU commands, or in the case of the WebGL one, right? We're just plumbing GL commands through.
Basically, just simplify the code.
It's for the recording.
Yes, for the recording.
Just simplifying the code level, the entry code level to developers who are not familiar with native code, making it easier to develop, basically.
Right.
But the performance by default will never be the same.
It will never be the same, but that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be worse.
No,
So
not
we have examples where mathematical, like data processing, where JavaScript can actually outperform the same code written in C, because we can do runtime optimization. We can look at it and say, hey, we don't have to execute this the traditional way.
Those are the numbers I was talking about, not about how many people develop with it, just the actual execution of a command.
Yeah. So there are two angles to it, right? There's the JavaScript execution where you're doing your programming, and then there's the system calls and the web things like styling and DOM manipulation, things like that. There are a lot of different aspects to web performance. We have a question back here as well.
Hi. Not a question. I was referring to the Facebook example. We saw 1 or 2 weeks ago, Sencha Touch was providing his Passbook. It's like a FB HTML is ready.com. You should try it on any web browser. So
yeah, we've definitely tried Passbook lots of times, and it's a great example of using web technologies to solve exactly the issues that Facebook was having trouble with. Right? The things that they complained about not being fast enough, scrolling lists. Right? That's like the #1 performance thing. It doesn't scroll like native, and Passbook is exactly the content that Facebook is trying to serve, scrolling as fast as native.
Infinite list.
Yes, it is clearly possible. Now, interestingly, the Facebook application, even the native Facebook application on every device, has a huge amount of web technology in it. So even though it's a native wrapper, it's really a hybrid application where even the majority of the content is rendered by WebKit. So they haven't abandoned HTML5 by any stretch.
I want to add that sometimes developers, we as developers, we use a lot of our own vocabulary for users. Like users want a native feeling. What is a native feeling, right? My mom wants to play Angry Birds or to share a picture on Facebook as fast as possible. She doesn't want a native feeling. Right? So what is a native feeling?
I think that really when people say native or act like native or native feeling, they really just mean fast.
Yeah, probably.
Besides, maybe it's time to redefine native and web. I mean, back 3 or 4 years ago, it was very clear that native was a lot better than web, especially because the mobile web browsers weren't all that good back then. But now, the difference is becoming less. It will never disappear, as I said before. I think native will always be slightly better than web, but web will have vastly greater reach. But maybe we should restart our thinking about, do we want this app to be native? I've often found that people reflexively say, oh, I want it native. Why do you want it native? Yeah, because. I mean, that's a problem we're having. People think native is so much better than web that your app must be native, and that's just not true anymore.
I think the other problem is that we don't have clear definitions. So if I ask you now what is native, maybe we have 2 or 3 different definitions. Like native is how we package and distribute our app. Native is how we develop the app. Native is how we use the UI controls. So it's like 3 different definitions for what native means. Like, is a WebWorks application a native application? What do you think? Or a PhoneGap application? Is it a native application?
I definitely think that in a lot of senses it is native. And I think PPK said a very interesting point at the beginning, which is, do you want your application to look like the UI guidelines of the platform that it's running on? Or do you want your application to look like your brand? Or do you want your application to try to merge those things? And that is also a big piece of what people mean by native, and there's no reason that you can't do that using basically any technology. Like, you can generate any pixel using any runtime, really. And I think that the draw of the web is not so much about can I do this with the web, but I have web experience. I'm making a website anyway. I have a mobile website for my company or a desktop website and web assets and web expertise. How can I build an app using this that is awesome, works really well, is fast, integrates with the platform, and is easy for me to develop and maintain and bring to other platforms? And that is where the web clearly wins. Because if you build your application in Objective-C, porting that to another platform is still going to be a pain.
So let's maybe get a little bit more controversial now. Let's get some opinions on, well, I think the fact that we are having this conversation clearly points to the fact that the web has, well, we have work to do in terms of the support, the web engine, the browsers. We have work to do in order to improve the development experience and take away some of these questions that people have about a web application. Even if they're unfounded, the fact that we're hearing them means that something is missing. So where do we need to go with our web engines? What do we have to improve in the standards in 2013, 2014 to take away some of these questions? Developer tools, all of these. PPK, I think you want to start first.
Do I? Oh, okay, cool. Well, actually, I don't have a suggestion as such. I mean, there are clearly a lot of small things that have to be changed. There's this CSS property that isn't implemented quite properly in WebKit or somewhere else. But I want to avoid to list a long list of bugs that still have to be solved.
Right. So a lot of bugs is a lot of bug fixing has to go in. Is certainly one thing.
And that will remain there forever. Keeping track of what the competition is doing, but all browser vendors nowadays are pretty good at that. I mean,
it's actually a small community, so we do talk quite a bit.
Yes. I mean, I'm doing a lot of, I'm writing a lot of new CSS tests now, and I noticed that in some areas, Firefox is clearly ahead of the rest of the browsers. So I'm kind of hoping the rest of the browsers will catch up, because some features are pretty nice and you can use them. But what I'm saying now doesn't address the fundamental question of where should the browser go next. To be honest, I'm not sure. I can only say device APIs. In the end, it should be possible to connect your web application or maybe even your website to the user's address book, camera, etc. But there are clear security issues there. We don't want to go to a random website which steals your entire address book and posts it to a server, right? So I would love to see some progress in that part, especially on the security issues. I mean, it's not a technical issue, it's a security issue, first of all.
Really, one of the main challenges that you have is the problem of timing, right? Because now we're using web technologies for mobile devices, and mobile devices basically are changing so fast that the web standards can go at that rhythm. So that's the problem I'm seeing, right? Because before this on the web, we're changing maybe once per 2 years or 3 years. And now we need changes every month. We have new challenges all the time.
It seems to me that that's one of the key roles of the frameworks, though, to abstract that away, right? Do you have any comments about the frameworks and where they would need to be going in order to enable some of the new functionality that's coming in, but also create more of a common field for web application development?
Well, the problem is that feeling that the frameworks is the way to create a standard. That's a strange idea.
It abstracts the standard and creates a new standard.
Why the standard cannot be the framework, right, directly? Right. So the problem is that I'm seeing a lot of people that are relying too much on frameworks, right? So they don't get the idea of what's happening behind. So I'm just using the framework because I use a framework because that's the only thing I know. And I'm seeing a lot of websites and web apps, they don't need any framework, right? So it's like using jQuery because it's there, right? And because I don't want to write document.getElement by ID, right? And it's not necessary anymore. So I'm not saying that jQuery is not a good idea and good framework. It's an excellent framework, and a lot of apps, they need DOM manipulation that jQuery really is really a good framework on that. But sometimes and I can say that maybe mostly mobile web applications or mobile websites, they don't need jQuery, right? They need just plain JavaScript and that's enough. And so why are we using a framework for that?
I don't know if you've read about the research that was being done early last year. There was a team who took an Android phone and measured battery usage, and then they loaded a Wikipedia page. And the problem with Wikipedia is they have this very simple accordion effect on the on their mobile website, and they use jQuery for that, which basically means they have to download jQuery, they have to execute the entire library for one small effect. So what they did is they loaded the standard jQuery page, and they rewrote that script in 20 lines, because you don't need jQuery for a simple effect like that. And they loaded that page and measured battery consumption, and it was about 1/3 less or something.
Yeah, something like that.
1/3 of the energy to display the web page was used up by jQuery, not by downloading, but by executing.
So basically, if you're reading a lot of Wikipedia articles, maybe you say, wait, but jQuery is already on the cache. But it's not the cache problem. It's not just the transfer. So every HTML that has the script source jQuery.js needs to parse again the jQuery file, all the file with all the IE6 code, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
So.
Every single page.
And if it gets executed enough times, then we start to JIT it, and JITting is also very expensive. So, yes.
Yes. So, personally, I think that the usefulness of the current JavaScript libraries is at an end, and we need micro libraries or micro frameworks, something like that. There's already a movement going on. They say, okay, we want to do a small task, we write a small bit of JavaScript for that.
So feature-based libraries, effectively.
Yes.
Well, even jQuery next version 2.0, I believe it will have the ability for us to select which parts of the framework we need. And so
that will help a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
So, similar to the approach of Alice then, where Alice was built as just very targeted at certain types of CSS effects. Yeah. Sorry, Eli, do you have any other?
I mean, I think that the frameworks serve a very important purpose, and that is people who want to build web applications that need to target lots of platforms or need to especially target older browsers with totally different standard support. Hiding those features or those differences in the platforms from the app developer can be a huge win in terms of development time. Also, some of the frameworks come with very nice tooling and a whole ecosystem around all of the APIs you need. Some of them have cloud integration with payment services. We, of course, provide that through our framework. But if you need these things, there are standard web ways of doing all of them. But that doesn't make it the easiest possible way to do it. There are also some frameworks that are targeted at a very high-end experience across only smartphones. And there are some frameworks that are targeted at getting some reasonable content out on the vast majority of phones out there in the world. And the vast majority of phones out there in the world don't have the latest generation WebKit-based browser of any type. And the web is very good at degrading gracefully or doing progressive enhancement, depending on the way that you want to look at it. And there are huge numbers of people to target who don't have the latest and greatest, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to target those people. If you want to target those people, things like jQuery Mobile are specifically designed to do that. And you can get a jQuery Mobile experience on a feature phone, and it works. So I think that there's still a lot of value.
I don't think that frameworks are bad. I'm seeing that a lot of people are using frameworks just because they're using frameworks. So there is no analysis behind that. So do I need it? And the other thing that I want to reinforce on frameworks is that sometimes when the framework says it's multi-platform, it's because it's iOS and Android. That's something you have a problem, right? So be careful when it says multi-platform. It's not just iOS and Android, right? So we have a question there, right? Or a comment.
One comment. Do we have some kind of heritage from the past or from the beginning on the web? I'm talking about the Microsoft thing, overslept the internet thing, and then kind of they flooded this the whole area with the Internet Explorer thing and tried to do their thing and try to, I don't know, create a known standard. So it's.
Let me say two things about Microsoft. One, IE9 is a great browser, and Microsoft seems to have finally seen the light. It supports most of the web standards that are important to people building cross-platform applications now, so at least it is not as much of a problem as it used to be. And the second thing is IE6 in its day was a great browser, and it became this horrible thing because everyone had to support it. And people have complained that WebKit is the new IE6, and I think that there is some valid point there. But web developers and browser engine makers are now very aware of these sort of things. And there are still viable browsers, excellent browsers, that are not based on WebKit and that are driving web standards forward. And I think it's a very healthy ecosystem, and it hasn't necessarily been in the past.
Nope, it's on.
Now it's
Sorry. Second is, I don't know, you were talking about the frameworks. So there are like feature frameworks now, or lightweight frameworks like Zepto or something like that. But do we need a general cache for such things in the browsers, like 2 or 3 standards which are implemented in every system, so we don't have to download and I don't know, things like that?
It sounds like a great idea in theory, but there's a problem with versioning. Basically, do you use the exact jQuery version that's cached in this device? And even if you do, maybe that device has one version higher or lower. So I mean, I think that what you're saying is a good idea, but the practical implementation is a lot more difficult than you might think.
You can still use a CDN now to try to solve that problem. It's not a solution, but like the jQuery CDN or Microsoft or Google CDNs.
Yeah, we tried to come up with a solution for that one on BlackBerry 6, I think, wasn't it? You just run into way too many practical problems implementing it, and I think we'll continue to work on it, but I don't know of a good solution in the near future.
I think Max touched on it earlier too. Right now the problem is, even if people use the same version of jQuery, it's not actually the same bytes served across the network from their server. Everybody modifies everything. Like, very few of the frameworks on top sites are byte for byte identical. And even if they did become, you somehow managed to get top content developers to sit down in a room and agree to use the same version of jQuery or whatever it is, if something becomes popular enough, then standards communities like the W3C are fully receptive and actively picking up things that everybody is using and making them part of the standard. And then you don't need a framework. It's in the browser. So it's not the fastest process. Everybody's not happy that HTML5 took however many years it did to standardize and all of these sort of things. But when things truly do get universal adoption, they become part of the engines. And we've seen it happen over and over and over again.
By promoting HTML5, aren't you eating into your own revenue stream?
The question was, by promoting HTML5, are we eating into our own revenue stream? And I don't think so at all. Like, we don't make money by supporting standards or by having a good rendering engine or anything like that.
Not getting the, let's say that HTML5 and mobile applications based on web are becoming the next big thing. So the revenue stream of native application and the cut of native application sales don't.
But people are monetizing HTML5 applications in AppWorld today.
Not the manufacturer.
But for example, in the case of BlackBerry, they have the WebWorks platform. So you can package your HTML5 app as a WebWorks application and go to the store. And they will get the same percentage as a native app. Because
we provide
again,
a payment service and all of these sort of things for people who want to use them in their web applications. But I mean, if you are building open web, you can certainly back-end your application onto whatever open payment provider you want and take us out of the middle. I mean, personally, I don't speak for AppWorld or BlackBerry World, but Personally, I think having the content available sells way more devices and makes the company way more money than getting a cut on the App Store.
So maybe I have a question for you. When you say HTML5, what are you talking about? Right? What is HTML5 for you?
It's a programming language. In the end, it's a programming language.
So it's
Declarative,
JavaScript?
but
So are you talking about JavaScript? Or,
well, the HTML,
or it's the W3C HTML5 specification? Or no, it's an umbrella. It's an umbrella term.
it's all of it.
I try not to be too pedantic about what is exactly called HTML5. Technically, there is a document that is HTML5, and it
Yes.
includes very few of the things that people refer to when they talk about what is actually part of the open web platform or HTML5. Like CSS3 is not technically part of HTML5, but I try to use it in a way that means what people expect. And there are certainly some more advanced, more bleeding edge APIs that are unclear about whether you should count them as part of HTML5, and some people do and some people don't. WebRTC may be a very good example there. But I don't really think there's too much value in picking a boundary and saying this is in and this is out. Open web platform is the W3C term for this, and I think it's a good term. So that's usually what I use when I try to use the umbrella.
I always compare HTML5 to the presents under the Christmas tree. There's something for everybody. You want a nice API? Here it is. You want some extra styles? Here it is. You want some, I don't know, semantic structures? Here they are. And I think that's actually a good way of seeing it. I mean, I'm firmly on the side of people who say, okay, you should basically call everything that's new HTML5. And HTML5 started out as a marketing term, don't forget that. We built HTML5 app. What does that mean? You give us more money. That's all that it means. So basically, think of what you would like in the next generation of browsers, and as far as I'm concerned, you can call it HTML5.
I wanted to mention something about the browser issue you talked about before. From my point of view, it's important for us as web developers that we take responsibility to cut with our older browser versions like IE7 or IE8 maybe. To move the web forward. Maybe I read an article about that issue that said that they propose to take much more money if you want to optimize your website, maybe for IE7 or IE8. And I think that's a good proposal we should do. Yeah.
Yeah, the problem here, right now we're talking specifically about the mobile web, which is different in the sense that all browsers are more modern. What's happening on the desktop web is roughly as you describe. We're seeing a movement away from lower IE versions, which I guess is good, but some clients still require you to support IE6 or IE7, and you should charge more money for that. It becomes an economic question. On the mobile side of things, the big problem is going to be Android 2. Because basically Android 2 is the IE6 of the mobile web. It supports too few features. There are all kinds of weird bugs that creep up, even if it passes official tests perfectly.
And it's still half of the Android market.
And it's still
more than half.
Yes,
more than half.
Half of the people who have an Android phone have an Android 2 phone. And not an Android 4 phone.
They will buy a BlackBerry 10, right?
I hope so. Look, I mean, we have that problem, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this. But obviously, most of the BlackBerries out there are not BlackBerry 10. We launched this week, last week. And there are still a lot of BlackBerries out there that are BlackBerry 6 and BlackBerry 7 that obviously don't support standards that came out after we shipped, or like after we did the software development for BlackBerry 6 and 7. So to be able to use the latest stuff on all of the phones in market is still a hard problem. And we're trying to solve that as well as we can for you by shipping as many of these devices as we can and getting people to upgrade. But unlike most native platforms, web developers are already good at supporting quirks and supporting legacy, and even if you have to charge more money for it, and even if it's hard, web developers are used to having to do this, and the web as a platform is built in such a way that it is much easier to be responsive or adaptive or whatever you want to call it. So I think that that's a very compelling reason to build applications in web, is because even if the experience is not your top tier or as well as you could possibly do it if you were deliberately targeting one old platform, at least you get something reasonable and you have a way to move into the future.
Maybe I have a question for us, right? So what do we think about polyfills on mobile browsers? And maybe the same question can be, what about talking about delivering the same experience to every device, right? That is basically a typical web technique, right? Desktop web technique.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually exactly what I mean is, so for those of you who don't know the word polyfill, this is basically a standard technique that web developers, especially framework developers or micro framework developers, have adopted to implement a standard API by behind the scenes figuring out what platform you're on or what support you have and falling back to older hacky ways of doing things. And web developers are really good at doing this. They're really good at saying, oh, we need this API. You know, I need it on Android 2.3. It doesn't have support for that. I can hack it doing this other way. But when I actually build my applications content, I can use the new API. So they're very good at abstracting around compatibility issues. So I think polyfills are a great thing.
Yeah, I will add there that on some polyfills, on some platforms, may not be maybe a good idea for performance, right? Because these are old devices, and sometimes it's a lot of JavaScript around. So on some cases, you should be careful about performance, right? When you try to emulate new features.
Yeah, I think it's what you said. Like, people picking up frameworks because that's all they know and they do that by default are losing out on building the best thing. People picking up polyfills without knowing what those polyfills are doing internally are losing out on doing the best thing. And if you could write deliberate, like, individual code for every possible platform, clearly you would, and clearly it would be the best possible thing on every platform, but that becomes an exponential problem that you can't really target. So the technique of being able to write to the newest standards and then implement those standards on old platforms is nice because it means you don't have to work as hard, but you do have to know what's going on. And if you have some really important old platform that for some reason has a massive installed user base for your application, then maybe it's worth not using a polyfill there and deliberately writing code for that platform.
Yeah, the problem is that time when you talk with customers, they want the same experience everywhere, right? So
yeah, but that's a desktop web thing that we're going to lose on mobile eventually. I mean, if a customer ever asks you that, say, okay, should it look exactly the same on the phone and on the tablet? And say, oh, no, not quite. And then, you know, you're having a conversation about this because, yeah, I mean, I've been getting tired of this for at least 10 years now. So it's time we solve this problem. And it's basically educating ourselves and educating the clients, which is always the most difficult part of web development.
Yeah, we actually, in the BlackBerry team, we have a sub-team that only does outward-facing education and communication to solve some of these kinds of problems where we're getting the wrong content or sites are doing some suboptimal things. And it's a pervasive problem. It actually applies to all devices. And as we gain market share, we'll see more proactive response on BlackBerry 10. Much the way some of the other devices do, but we had a great example we came across very recently. Let's see if this one comes up again. There we go. Apparently, our current font size is not supported, whatever font size that is, on Google Maps. So this is what they're serving us at the moment, and we're working with them to get it improved. But it also doesn't feature pinch zoom. If you could see, I'm pinching the screen right now. There's no reason why. They're not using the most optimal things on our platform.
Well, that's maybe the problem when we are doing device detection, right?
Yeah.
That devices are changing every month. So we need to figure out how to create a good way of feature detection.
Yeah, exactly. And in terms of design, here's another example, this is substantially the same page that you're served on a desktop, and you can see it's formatted quite nicely on the mobile. So, responsive design. Any comments on responsive design?
Yeah, I think it's cool.
Yeah.
Everybody knows what responsive design is, right? You create one single web page with HTML and CSS, and you use media queries to say, okay, if the screen's smaller than 800, then remove the third column or put it on, at the bottom of the page, and if it's smaller than, I don't know, 400, make the whole page single column. And that's basically what was happening there. And I think it's an absolutely great solution to a very naughty problem, although there are plenty of problems still to be solved, and we have a question there.
It's a comment on that. Basically, it's a way how to show the media on the site. It's like I think when you're doing with images,
well, images,
yes,
and so on. Yes,
images, yes, or something like
yes,
that. But I think images is quite a headache. Because I don't know, you have to put on your server up to 4 different sizes, 4 different. It's like to change the resolution of the screen or something like that, or when you go from landscape to portrait mode or something like that, and you have to deliver another picture in another resolution or size, and I think. It's not only for the images. It's video content or something like that. This
those were the small little details I was talking about earlier.
Okay.
Just use SVG.
Yeah, you're saying SVG to everything.
This is the main headaches I think we have here with the responsive design.
Yes. I mean, lots of people are thinking about this. Fortunately, some very clever people are finding solutions and putting them out in the public. And I mean, I hope that everybody understands what the problem is. If I have a beautiful photo on my newspaper website and the photo is, I don't know, 800 pixels wide, then it's obviously far too wide for a mobile device. So you'd send the mobile device a smaller picture. Which sounds simple until you start to think about the details, right? Because if the mobile website changes orientation, it becomes wider, and you might think, oh, then we can show the big picture. But it shouldn't start downloading it because you're on a 3G connection. And I mean, the whole responsive images problem is where everything comes together. Screen size, connection speed, speed of the browser. Excuse me?
Density.
Pixel density, definitely, because if you're on a retina screen, ideally you would like to serve a retina image. And so I think actually once we solve this, or once we understand how to approach the problem, even without totally solving it, I think we have true responsive design. Do you agree that it's the most serious problem in responsive design, and once we've solved that, we are basically clear?
Well, yeah, I have another problem. I'm seeing a lot of websites that basically are using responsive web design to hide content when it's a mobile phone. So if you're doing that, I don't think it's a good idea, right? You don't need to. We are sending the device a lot of HTML that you're not going to see on the device. So,
or even worse, images that you're never going to see.
Yeah. So if you're designing a website from scratch now and you know all the new techniques, you need to understand the viewport, the pixel radio, and all new stuff around mobile web, responsive web design is a good idea. If you are taking your current desktop website and try to apply responsive web design over it, maybe it's not a good idea when you have like 15 or 25 script elements on the page, right?
So we web developers have a lot to learn. And it's partly the thing to do with the browser vendor to educate us, which is what you're doing here right now. And I think most browser vendors actually want to talk about this sort of stuff. And they want to hear about our solutions, and they might even consider implementing them. But I mean, we have only been doing mobile web development seriously for less than 3 years, right? 3 years ago, when I was talking about mobile web development, everybody thought, oh, yeah, that's going to be interesting in the future. No, it's going to be interesting now, I said, and half a year later I was right. But What we basically have to find out here is the fundamental problems of mobile web development, where it differs from traditional desktop web development. I mean, CSS fonts and colors are pretty much the same. But when we go to the layout of a page, when we go to using the touch events properly, that's a whole different beast. And that's basically what we as web developers should concentrate on. That's why I'm personally concentrating mostly on those two areas, and the touch events and the size and, of the viewport, because they're so very different on desktop and on mobile. Actually, I'm going to give a session on the viewport tomorrow at 2 or something. So if you want to hear some gory details about viewport implementations, come to my session.
So shifting gears a little bit, the development of the BlackBerry 10 browser, how does some of these things, how are they handled or applied when we develop the browser application? Because we faced obviously many of the same challenges. We had we needed to keep the code as small as possible, even though it was on device already, for startup time reasons and for just responsiveness reasons. This was sort of an example of the ultimate of pushing HTML and JavaScript to their limits to be fast, efficient, compact, not use too much memory. Any particular interesting things? Do we use any frameworks or anything like that that were
well, I think for the browser, there were some areas where we had to push the standards, and when there wasn't something to implement exactly what we needed. But in the end, those ended up being very few areas. And most of the browser application code, most of the HTML and JavaScript and CSS, would run and look like the browser and be a perfectly functional application on any platform. So there's not a lot of magic there. Mostly it was about using web development best practices that, as PPK said, a lot of mobile web developers are still figuring out. There isn't a huge corpus of best practices that everybody knows and are the best way of doing things out there already, but there are lots of things that the framework developers do. There are lots of things that mobile websites have figured out, especially from the top content developers, about how to target mobile web efficiently and how to target modern browsers efficiently. Things like CSS transitions and taking advantage of hardware acceleration and native scrolling and all of this sort of stuff. And all we did in the browser was use those best practices. We had an advantage that we didn't really care if it ran on any other platform, so we didn't care about supporting Android 2 with all of its brokenness or IE7 or any of those things. But really, it's a modern web app. It looks like a modern web app that you would build for any platform.
In fact, I think when we started developing the browser, the guys who were doing the initial work did it in Chrome, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, we used almost all of the development happened on the desktop. Somebody would open up their text editor and write some HTML and CSS and open it in Chrome and use the Chrome developer tools to tweak it until it looked good, and then host a web server on their desktop and make a little tiny WebWorks app that just pointed to their desktop and ran it on the device, and then use Remote Web Inspector to tweak it on the device until it looked good. But it was the standard web workflow. We didn't have to compile things, and we didn't have to do expensive and complicated and deployments and worry about signing keys and all of this kind of stuff. We just had a text editor and a web browser, and
that's one of the
standard stuff.
big thing of using web technology. So I have done a lot of native web applications, and it's just I create a container, I run a local HTTP server, and that's all I need. So if I need to add a new feature to the app, I just change what I'm developing the app, right? So in developer mode, I'm just changing my HTML of my desktop computer, reload the app, and that's all. I don't need to recompile, I don't need to resign, really nothing, right? So that's the really good thing about using web technologies for apps. I mean, it's not for every app, but it's for most apps, it's enough.
And of course, after we went through this whole process of bootstrapping the browser application, we got it up and running. We got it running on the device. We had a launcher application that could bring it up without having, it's being self-hosted, you can't run the browser without the browser, so obviously we had to have a bootstrap tool. Once we got through all that process, I remember we ended up with something that was really slow and clunky. And then we started the process of looking at what we had done and doing some very simple things that got us from a slow, clunky application to something that started up quite quickly and was very responsive. I remember Eli probably knows many more things than I do, but one of the interesting optimizations we did that saved a good, I think, 10% off of our startup time was to not load all the translations for every language under the sun. It's a very simple thing, but I think these are the kinds of mistakes that web developers are making that are maybe not so noticeable on the desktop, or they don't have the tools to pull these things out. So my point is, it's really just programming in the end. It's all the same things you would do in a native application you need to do on the web as well. Some of them are easier, some of them are a little more difficult. Were there any other interesting anecdotes that you can remember from?
Sure. I mean, I think, like George said, programming is programming. Using different programming languages certainly have lots of different impacts on the way that you develop your application. Using a very dynamic scripting type language like JavaScript versus writing something in C++ is different. But building an app has certain requirements, and it doesn't really matter what technology you're using. So we deferred loading of things that we didn't need right away. And you would do that in a native app, you would do that in a web app, and we had to kind of figure out how to do that because there isn't this known way of doing that on the web that everyone agrees is the best way of doing it. But these are best practices for developing any type of application.
You can be a good developer or a bad developer
Sure.
on any technology, right?
It is very easy to build a bad web app, but it's very easy to build a bad native app too.
Yeah, exactly. So any closing thoughts? I think we're just up to the... One last question. Let's go with that.
How about the ability of the mobile OS which is handling the native things and which is handling the web things? So I think there must be another way of thinking to handle the whole web events, because the web stack and so on, they are running differently from the native stuff. They are handling differently in the US. Do we think? Do we need? I don't know, like examples from Firefox OS or something like that, or like the application or the basic OS must handle the web events faster on like native events. Is it something like for the future? I don't know if
I quite understand the question, but clearly there are other platforms out there that are entirely, like mobile platforms that are entirely web-based. We know Firefox OS is coming, we know Tizen is coming, and every app on those platforms is built in web technologies. So it is clearly viable to do so. And I think on BlackBerry 10, we've made a very clear statement that there are two ways of building apps. You can build an app in Cascades using our native framework in C++, or you can build an app using web technologies, using WebWorks. And both of those are 100% like fully supported first-class application runtimes. And underneath it, the entire platform has to be built in such a way that it is possible to do all of the things that you need to do in both of those runtimes. You know, maybe there's some cases where Cascades does something nicer or web does something nicer, but you know, we built BlackBerry 10 so that you can build a first-class web app.
Right.
Yes.
We actually have a layer inside our web stack that merges the two, that takes care of the performance implications and the marshalling and everything like that.
And we do have web integration into the Cascades runtime as well. So you can build a hybrid application where the outer application is Cascades, and you stick a web view in and you run web content in Cascades.
Like the browser.
Well, the browser has no Cascades at all.
Browser has no Cascades.
The browser is web in web, but you could have web in Cascades. And we do support that way of programming as well. And you know, that is popular on some platforms.
But the interesting thing is you can open a Cascades card inside the browser, which is a web application. So
Absolutely.
you can see they're equal peers. Anyway, I think
Hello. I just have one question. So where are we on having standards for audio streaming and video playback for mobile web and HTML5?
I would say that we currently have standards for both audio playback and video streaming. The things that are different between platforms are primarily things like codecs.
Yeah.
And I don't think you will ever get anyone to agree, or everyone to agree, on using the same codec. So if you are in the business of doing streaming video on the web, you will always have to support multiple codecs. But it's a limited number, and things, and from an API perspective, things work reasonably well right now. There are some up-and-coming standards, things like web audio, which is not quite the same thing as audio playback, but that's getting a lot more adoption for audio processing and that sort of thing, and that is definitely, becoming much more standardized. All right, I think we're out of time. Thank you. You can come talk to us later. We'll be around.
Yeah, come. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.